Greg Sutton had always been the kind of guy who made people believe he was untouchable. In everyone's eyes, Greg could slip out of any trouble, whether it was getting caught drunk driving or talking his way out of situations that would crush anyone else. That's why, when I got the call from his sister, sobbing and barely able to speak, I immediately assumed it was about their mother. But as she forced the words out, I had to make her repeat them, because I thought I'd misheard. Greg was dead. The police found his body in his apartment after his boss reported him missing for 2 days, concerned that he hadn't shown up for work. They had to break down the door to get in, but strangely, there were no signs of forced entry from the outside. In the living room, Greg's body lay twisted in ways no human body should bend. From what I overheard the officers muttering outside, his death defied reason, limbs contorted at impossible angles, his spine bent grotesquely, as though someone had grabbed both ends of his body and twisted hard. Worst of all, his eyes were gone, just empty sockets, hollow and cruelly scooped out. The scene made even less sense the longer they examined it. There was no spray of blood as if a struggle had taken place, no overturned furniture, no broken locks or windows. Everything was undisturbed, quiet, except for Greg's mangled body. The police could only file it under suspicious circumstances, which was really just another way of saying they had no clue what had happened. Greg, the guy who made us all believe he could survive anything, was reduced to a closed coffin and a framed photo sitting on a wooden stand. Despite all the friends he once surrounded himself with, his funeral felt sparse, the silence heavier than any words could carry. Standing there, staring at that coffin, I couldn't shake the disbelief. Greg, the reckless one, the one who laughed in the face of danger, had met an end that was not just tragic but horrifying beyond imagination. Greg's funeral was held on a bleak afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds, as if nature itself wanted to mirror the weight of grief pressing down on the small church. The coffin was closed, resting at the front, a framed photograph of Greg smiling placed on top. That grin, cocky, fearless, was one we all remembered too well. It cut deep now, reminding us that the man we once thought untouchable had met a death too horrific to even picture. As I stepped inside, I saw faces I hadn't encountered in years. Jamie sat near the front pew, thinner than I remembered, his hair streaked gray far too early. He nodded at me, but his eyes darted away quickly, like he was carrying a burden he didn't want exposed. Across the aisle, Raph slouched in an ill-fitting suit, his jaw set in that same defiant way, though a flicker of unease broke through his mask. Lex lingered in the back corner, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers despite the setting, his cold eyes scanning the room, lips curled into a mocking half-smile. We were back together again, the four of us, not as friends but as reluctant survivors bound by something darker. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, as if every greeting carried the sharp sting of memory. When I caught Jaime's eyes, the truth passed between us without a word. None of us had come here just to say goodbye to Greg. Deep down, we were all thinking of the same name, Danny. Halfway through the service, a stranger entered. He didn't belong, and we all knew it instantly. His cheap suit clung awkwardly to his tall frame, his slicked back hair and sharp gaze silenced the room in an instant. He introduced himself in a clipped tone, Detective Harlan, investigating Greg's death. Harlan didn't waste time on pleasantries. He scanned our group, his voice as cold as iron. Did Greg have enemies? Anyone who might want to see him dead? No one answered. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and damning. Then Harlan leaned forward slightly, his words deliberate, calculated to unsettle. One name keeps coming up. Danny Truwillo. Do you know him? The question struck like a hammer. My pulse quickened, and when I looked around, I saw the same reaction mirrored on Jaime's, Raph's, and Lex's faces. Danny, a name we had buried, locked away in the past along with everything that happened that night. For 15 years, we had convinced ourselves it was forgotten. Now, with Greg dead in a way no one could explain, that name surfaced again, raw and poisonous. The funeral ended in silence, no comfort exchanged, no words of closure. We left separately, each carrying our own shadows. But one thought followed me out into the gray afternoon, echoing louder than the church bells. Danny Truwillo. The boy we had locked in a locker and left behind. The boy who was never supposed to come back. Danny Truwillo was unlike anyone else at school. Thin, withdrawn, always keeping his eyes down, he carried himself as if he wanted to disappear. His clothes were rumpled, his shoes worn down to the soles, and there was always a faint, musty smell clinging to him whenever he entered the classroom. That was all it took for the other kids to make him a target. And we, me, Jamie, Raph, Lex, and Greg, were among the worst. At first, it was harmless, or so we told ourselves. We hid his books, mocked him with cruel nicknames, shoved him in the hallway just to hear the laughter that followed. But over time, tormenting Danny became more than a pastime. It became a glue that held our group together. I can still remember the look in his eyes whenever we cornered him. There was hatred there, yes, but something else too, something raw and dangerous, like a storm bottled up inside. We ignored it. To us, Danny was just the kid you pushed around. Greg, reckless and loud, always came up with the worst ideas. Raph followed eagerly, and Lex would stand by, smirking as if the whole thing were some theater for his amusement. Jamie rarely laid a hand on Danny, but he never stepped in. None of us did. We all had the chance to stop, and we didn't. The worst came one late afternoon. We were hanging around by the old lockers after school when Greg thought up what he called a lesson Danny wouldn't forget. When Danny passed by, we surrounded him, jeering, and shoved him into one of the rusted lockers. I can still hear the clang of the metal door slamming shut, the click of the lock, and Danny's desperate pounding from the inside. "Let me out! Please, let me out!" he screamed, his voice cracking in that cramped space. But we only laughed. Lex even mocked his cries, and the rest of us roared at the performance. When the dismissal bell rang, we walked away, convinced someone would find him soon enough. But the next morning, Danny was gone. The locker was empty, like he had never been there at all. Rumors spread fast. His parents had died just days later in some bizarre accident. The Trujillo house was boarded up, and Danny disappeared from the town, from our lives. No one saw him again. And we, those of us who stood outside that locker, never spoke of it. We buried it deep, treating it as a secret that would rot away with time. Yet 15 years later, with Greg's body mangled beyond recognition, that secret clawed its way back to the surface. We all understood it then. The past had never really gone to sleep. It had only been waiting. Lex was next. The news came only weeks after Greg's funeral, while we were still trying to shake off the sense of unease that clung to us like a cold film of dust. The police found Lex's body in his rundown apartment on the edge of town. I heard the unofficial details from an officer I knew. His body had been torn apart, almost unrecognizable. Bones shattered into fragments, organs scattered across the room. And, just like Greg, his eyes were gone, two empty sockets staring into nothing. When I first heard, my heart nearly stopped. Lex had always been the one who laughed, who mocked everything, who lived like nothing could touch him. I remembered him saying once, "I don't fear the devil. I only fear not living enough." The way he died made that line feel like a cruel joke, an epitaph carved in blood and silence. Lex's death forced the rest of us, me, Jamie, and Raph, to face what we had been denying. This wasn't coincidence. Greg, then Lex, each taken in the same horrific fashion. And both crime scenes marked by the same chilling signature, the name Danny. Detective Harlan came back, his face more severe than ever. He sat across from us in a small cafe, his eyes sharp, dissecting every twitch, every glance. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said, voice rough, deliberate. "You're holding something back. This name, Danny Trujillo, he wasn't just some harmless kid from school. I need the truth." Jaime's hands trembled, his coffee sloshing dangerously close to spilling. He looked like a man unraveling thread by thread. Raph slammed his palm against the table, snarling, "You don't understand." And me, I stayed silent. Because what could I possibly say? How could I tell a detective that years ago we shoved Danny into a locker and left him there, screaming in the dark, until he disappeared? How could I admit that now, 15 years later, it felt like he, or something wearing his name, was hunting us down? Harlan's gaze lingered, suspicion heavy in his silence. But he didn't press further that day. Maybe he saw enough in our faces to know we were lying. Or maybe he thought we were simply terrified. Either way, he left us with nothing but his warning: secrets don't stay buried. And whoever this Danny is, he's not done. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a hand dragging across the walls. I saw Greg's twisted corpse behind my eyelids, Lex's mangled remains, and above it all, I heard the echoes, The hollow banging on metal, a boy's desperate plea. Let me out. Please, let me out. And I knew then, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, this wouldn't stop. Danny, or whatever had become of him, was still out there. And he was coming for the rest of us. After Lex's death, fear was no longer a passing sensation. It had become something tangible, something woven into every breath we took, every moment we tried to close our eyes. Jamie and Raph rarely left each other's side, and I found myself unable to even look into mirrors at work. I was terrified that if I stared long enough, I'd see a face staring back that wasn't mine. We did the only thing left to us. We began digging into Danny. Jamie took the lead, combing through old records in the local library. I reached out to a few of our former teachers, while Raph leaned on his connections in the police force. Slowly, a picture began to form, distorted, unsettling, and far darker than any of us had expected. The official records claimed that shortly after his disappearance from school, Danny had been placed in a state-run psychiatric facility. How he ended up there was unclear, but what chilled us was what came next. Just a few months later, he vanished from that institution as well. No missing person report, no transfer papers, nothing. It was as if someone had deliberately erased his existence from every file. Then came the revelation about Danny's parents. They had died just days after the locker incident. The file listed the cause as a gas leak that led to a house explosion. But a retired officer, one of the men who had investigated the scene back then, quietly told Raph a different version. That wasn't an accident, he muttered. Someone made sure they died. It looked staged. The deeper we dug, the colder the trail became. Danny hadn't simply vanished. He had been scrubbed clean from the world, removed like a stain no one wanted to acknowledge. But that left us with a question that gnawed at our sanity. If Danny had been erased, then what, or who, was writing his name at the crime scenes of Greg and Lex? Who was settling this old debt in blood? That night, we gathered at Jaime's house. The room was dim, the only light coming from a weak desk lamp that threw long shadows over our tired faces. Jamie spoke first, his voice trembling, almost breaking. Maybe Danny never walked out of that locker. Maybe what came out wasn't Danny at all. Silence followed. No one wanted to say it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Danny Trujillo had died 15 years ago. And whatever was hunting us now, it wasn't human. After we dug into Danny's past, Jamie began to change. He had always been the sensitive one, but now fear seemed to take root in his very soul. He told us that every night he dreamed of the locker from all those years ago. In the dream, he stood in a dark hallway, listening to the relentless banging from inside. When he approached, pale fingers pushed through the narrow slit, dripping blood onto the tiled floor. Danny's voice came from within, frail yet terrifying. Jamie, open the door for me. At first, we thought they were only nightmares born from guilt. But soon the dreams began bleeding into his waking life. Jamie confessed that he could hear the banging even when he was awake, while driving, while sitting alone in his apartment, even in broad daylight. One night, he called me near midnight, his voice trembling with panic. It's outside my door. I can hear it breathing, scratching at the wood. I don't dare open it. The next day, we went to his apartment. The place was in disarray, every light left on, but Jamie never answered. When the police forced their way inside, what we saw still haunts me. Jamie lay collapsed in front of his bedroom door, body twisted as if he had tried to flee in his last moments. His skin was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and deep bruises wrapped around his neck, marks of a massive, unseen hand that had strangled the life out of him. Worse still was the message on the wall just behind his body. Scrawled in thick, black, tar-like liquid were 3 words, "Let me out." The investigators tried to rationalize it. They spoke of an intruder, of some deranged killer who had broken in and staged the scene. But we knew the truth. No one had broken in. What Jamie heard outside his door that night was not a man. It was something else, and it had come to claim him. From that day on, the emptiness in our group became unbearable. Greg was gone. Lex was gone. Now Jamie, too, was taken. 3 of us dead, and only Raph and I remained. We no longer tried to laugh, no longer made excuses or clung to rational explanations. There was only one truth left. Danny, or whatever wore Danny's name, would not stop until we were all gone. I remember the last time I spoke to Jamie, just days before his death. His eyes were hollow from lack of sleep, his voice a broken whisper. "It won't let me go. he said. "And then it'll come for you." I thought he was just paranoid then, lost to his own terror. But as I looked down at his cold, lifeless body, I realized he had been right all along. After Jaime's death, we knew we couldn't just sit and wait. Fear had become a noose tightening around our throats, squeezing us a little more with each passing day. Raph and I decided it was time to face it. If Danny, or the thing that bore his name, was coming for us, then this time we would be ready. We chose a moonless night. Raph carried his father's old hunting rifle, while I kept a folding knife in my pocket. Deep down, we both understood these weapons would do nothing against what hunted us. But holding them gave us a fleeting illusion of control, as if we weren't completely powerless. We returned to the abandoned school, the place where it had all begun. The hallways were narrow and suffocating, dust thick on every surface, shattered bulbs dangling like broken teeth. The row of old lockers creaked as the night wind whistled through. Each step echoed with an eerie familiarity, dragging me back to that night 15 years ago. Every sound prickled my skin, for I knew at any moment it could appear. Around midnight, the noises started. At first, just a faint tapping, like fingernails brushing against metal. Raph and I locked eyes, both remembering the locker from long ago. The tapping grew louder, sharper, until the very walls seemed to vibrate with it. And then, from the far end of the hallway, it emerged. The creature, it wasn't Danny anymore, but it wasn't entirely a stranger either. Its face was grotesquely warped, half the features still resembling a teenager trapped in time, the other half decayed and rotting, flesh peeling to reveal jagged bone. Its eyes, or rather, the hollow sockets where eyes should be, glowed faintly red, casting a sinister light. Every step it took echoed like a death knell, dragging the weight of buried years behind it. Raph raised the rifle, hands trembling, and fired. The gunshot roared through the empty school, but the creature only staggered for a heartbeat before continuing forward. I lunged with my knife, slashing desperately, but the blade slid through it like thick fog. There was no resistance, no wound, nothing but the crushing realization that we were fighting something beyond flesh. It opened its mouth, and the sound that came out was a guttural rasp, not quite human yet horribly intelligible. "Let me out." In that moment, we understood. This was no longer a person. It wasn't even a ghost in the way stories tell it. It was hatred, pain, and darkness fused into a single, impossible form, a monster born from our sin. Raph grabbed my arm, his eyes blazing with terror and resolve. "Run," he hissed. Now, we ran blindly through the dark halls, the heavy footsteps of the creature pounding behind us like a hammer driving nails into our chests. Every time I glanced back, it was closer, the red glow from its hollow sockets burning against the crumbling walls. Raph kept shouting at me to run faster, but I could tell, he was preparing for something else. When we reached the gymnasium, Raph stopped. His breath was ragged, but his eyes were steady. He shoved me through the exit door, locking it behind me. "You have to live to tell this. I'll hold it off." I screamed, begged him not to, but his gaze was resolute, stronger than I had ever seen it. He turned back to face the approaching darkness, while I was dragged away, powerless. I stumbled through another hallway, trying to find a way back in. That's when I heard it, not Raph's voice, but another. A cracked, broken voice, familiar in a way that made my blood freeze. "Danny." The voice didn't echo in the air. It spoke directly inside my head, like a poison whisper. "You locked me in. You left me in the dark." I begged, I pounded, I cried, but no one opened the door. I died in that locker. And when I died, something else came. It whispered to me, it swallowed me whole, and in return, it gave me another chance. I froze where I stood. The nightmare that had haunted us for 15 years finally revealed itself. Danny had died that night. But in his final moments, something darker had slipped inside, merging with him, twisting him into the abomination that now hunted us. The voice hissed again, each word slicing through my mind like glass. "I'm not just Danny anymore. I am everything you planted. Fear, guilt, darkness. You created me, and now I will take everything from you." In that instant, I knew Raph didn't stand a chance. He wasn't fighting a vengeful ghost. He was facing a nightmare born from our sins, a fusion of death and hatred that no weapon could destroy. I heard Raph's screams echo from the gym, torn apart by the creature's guttural growls. Then, silence. The door burst open, From the blackness, it emerged. But this time, it didn't advance immediately. It stopped in front of me. For a moment that felt endless, I stared into its hollow sockets, and there, for a flicker, I saw him. Danny. A thin, pale boy, face gaunt with despair, still trapped in the agony of that night. The creature leaned close, its voice a whisper of rust and decay. Now it's your turn. My body froze, heart hammering wildly as the creature loomed in front of me. Its breath was ice cold, like wind spilling from a grave, carrying the stench of rotting flesh. For a moment, I thought this was it, that Greg, Lex, Jamie, and Raph had only been the prelude, and I was to be the conclusion. But when I looked deeper into those hollow sockets, I saw Danny. A boy's desperate eyes flickered within the monstrous shell, pleading, trapped. My fear twisted into something sharper, anger. I shouted, not sure if I was speaking to Danny or to the monster itself. You want me dead? Then I won't go alone. The creature roared and lunged. I dodged, the folding knife in my hand little more than a scrap of useless metal. But then I remembered, when Raph had fired, the thing had faltered, if only for a second. It wasn't invincible. There had to be a weakness. I stumbled into the school's old science lab. The place was wrecked, broken desks, shattered glass, but in the corner, dusty bottles of alcohol and acid still lingered. An idea struck me like lightning. If knives and bullets meant nothing, maybe fire would. The door burst open, the creature filling the frame with its hulking shadow. I hurled the alcohol across its body, liquid soaking into its decaying flesh. As it advanced, I flicked my lighter. A tiny flame sparked, then the room exploded into blazing light. The fire consumed everything. The creature shrieked, a sound that rattled the walls to their foundations. Through the inferno, I saw Danny's face flicker, agonized, but almost relieved. In that instant, I didn't know if I was destroying a monster or finally freeing a soul that had been chained for far too long. The walls cracked, the ceiling caved. I hurled myself through a window, crashing onto the frozen ground outside. Pain tore through me, sharp and blinding, but behind me I heard the creature's final scream echo into the night, and then silence. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed. The police told me the abandoned school had burned to the ground. Nothing remained. No evidence, no body, just me. The lone survivor, but I know the truth. Fire can destroy flesh, but can it burn away what has lived in the dark for 15 years? Every night when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The faint, steady knocking. Danny never truly disappeared, and deep down, I know this fight isn't over. I thought it had all ended in the fire. That creature, Danny, or whatever he had become, was reduced to ashes, and I was the only one left alive. But in the days that followed, I realized fire could destroy a body, but it could never burn away the darkness. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to my small apartment. The first few nights, I expected peace, but instead, I heard it, the faint knocking, soft at first, echoing from the corners of the room. One knock, then two, then three, just like the pounding Danny had made against the locker door all those years ago. Whenever I looked in the mirror, I saw him standing behind me, only to vanish when I turned. In my dreams, I was dragged back to that burned school, flames still crackling while the screams of Raph, Jamie, Lex, and Greg twisted together in a horrifying chorus. There was no escape. I turned to sleeping pills, hoping for rest. But even in drugged slumber, the whispers followed me. You opened the door. You called me. Now we belong to each other forever. It was no longer Danny alone. It was something deeper, something ancient, a hatred that had found a vessel. And I was its final tether. I came to understand something terrible. To truly end this, a sacrifice had to be made. Greg had been the first. Jamie had suffered his gruesome fate. Raph had stood and fought, knowing what awaited him. Lex, too, had fallen. They had all paid, and now, the final price was mine. One night, I returned to the ruins of the old school, now nothing more than a blackened graveyard of ashes. I carried a can of gasoline, a box of matches, and one thought burning in my mind. If the darkness couldn't be killed, then maybe I could bury it along with myself. In the charred rubble, I heard it again, the knocking. 3 steady beats, like a death march. And there he was, Danny, half of his face melted, half still the boy I once knew. He smiled, a smile torn between suffering and malice. I struck the match. The tiny flame trembled in my hand, fragile yet absolute. In that moment, I didn't know if I was destroying myself or saving the world from a nightmare that had lingered too long. But I knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. The fire roared to life. The night was swallowed in red light. The knocking stopped, and then, only silence.